Triumphant Birth podcast. I'm Jamie Raisleger, doula, childbirth educator, and mom of 3, including twin babies. Thank you for being here as we explore the power of healing through childbirth, delve into the options, receive wisdom from guest experts, and hear inspiring stories that pave the way for healing and wholeness through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. Whether the journey is smooth sailing or filled with unexpected challenges, this is a supportive space for birth workers and individuals navigating their childbearing season of life. Together, let's embark on a journey toward empowerment, resilience, and triumph. Our babies will thank us. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Triumphant Birth podcast. Today, we have a couple of birth stories, and we have a guest, Samantha. And how do you say your last name, Samantha?
Dunnavant.
Dunnavant. Samantha Dunnavant. Okay, so Samantha lives in the heart of Virginia. She's a stay-at-home mother of 2 who believes that childbearing should commonly be a destination and not an obstacle. Your background is a licensed real estate agent in North Carolina and Virginia and a former flight attendant.
Yeah.
Currently, she spends her days raising 2 little men. She gardens throughout the year and raises pastured poultry in the summertime with her husband. Samantha has had a hospital birth and a home birth, and both of the experiences were so profound that she is called to share her story to other women in their childbearing years. Her hope is that women will have the confidence, knowledge, and support necessary for making the best of their time during each pregnancy, birth, and postpartum period. So welcome to the podcast, Samantha. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think a lot of my friends are tired of hearing my birth stuff.
Well, we love a good birth story here, and we have 2 birth stories that I'd like to talk with you about today. So what is your first son's name?
So Samuel, my first, he's 3.5 right now.
3.5. And so how did your pregnancy go with Samuel?
Yeah, so he was my first pregnancy. And, you know, my husband and I had just gotten married a couple months prior, and we weren't actually planning to have a baby. And, you know, I'd heard, you know, it takes time to get pregnant for a lot of people. And it happened really fast for us. So, like, when I found out that I was pregnant, I was like, where do I go? Do I go to urgent care? So my mother-in-law is a nurse, and she's like, well, you call the obstetrician. And I was like, okay. So I did that, and I was expecting it to be like, oh, come in for like a ultrasound. So I called them, and they were like, okay, so we're going to take your, you know, information, and then we'll have you come in 8 weeks and get an ultrasound. And I was like, I think 4 or 5 weeks pregnant at the time. So I was like, oh, that's a long time. And so I was just pregnant for 3 weeks, and I'm like, I have no idea. And I mean, I was just so uninformed about birth that I didn't even know what a placenta was. And I was really nervous to give birth because I've heard things like it's the closest that you get to death. You know, I've just heard a bunch of like bad things about it. And so I was very nervous. But when it comes to COVID, you know, just probably about 6 or 8 months prior to this, when I was a flight attendant, there were only like 5 people on flights for several months whenever it started to get hot and heavy with all the lockdowns and things like that. So we were still in that area of the lockdowns being over, but everyone was super mandated. There were lots of masks, and I had no idea what to expect with the doctors. And so every appointment that I went to, it was just me, because you can only have one person in an appointment. And so that's just how it was. I didn't really know what to ask or anything like that. And it was just standard, pee in a cup, measure your belly once you start growing, any questions and stuff like that. And the pregnancy with Samuel I was very nauseous. So I didn't actually have a child to take care of, but I was still laying around a lot of the times. And I didn't really eat anything other than like baked potatoes or pasta. And come about 16 or 18 weeks, I was not nauseous anymore, and everything went really smoothly with the pregnancy. So I think I only got sick about 2 or 3 times with Samuel, like outwardly. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So when it came to preparing for your birth, then did you take a hospital class? Did you, and I'm making an assumption, maybe I shouldn't do that, but I hear it a lot where first time moms, when they go to the hospital, that's just kind of what you do, right?
Yeah.
So was that the thought process at the time, or did you have any sorts of educational inputs for yourself, or how did that all look going into maybe like the end of your 3rd trimester and preparing for birth?
So whenever I was pregnant with Samuel, I did not prepare at all. The only thing that I did physically was bounce on a birth ball towards the last couple weeks of birth. And I learned that because my cousin had a baby like a couple months before, and she's a postpartum nurse, so that's what she did. So I was like, okay, I'll do that, right? And the other thing I did to prepare, so to speak, was I didn't know anything about birth.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, let me figure out, something. Why don't I listen to a birth podcast? I don't know where I got that idea from, but I looked up pregnancy and all that, and I found Dr. Berlin's Informed Pregnancy podcast, and I started to listen to a video, and like before I started to play it, I was like, it's okay, don't get scared, you're gonna be fine. Like I was really nervous, but I was like, I need to know something. And because whenever I would dig for information from like the women in my family before me, it was always very vague and just like one-liners. And so I wanted to know the depths. Like I wanted to get into like what it was. So I listened to my first birth story and I was hooked. And so every day I kept listening to birth stories, and I just learned just about everything I really needed to know. Like, what labor is like, how it starts, placentas, things to look out for. There's just so many nuggets to learn from other people's birth experiences. And I think that was such a huge resource to me. So that's all I did to prepare for birth. Literally, that's it.
It's a huge jumping off point, though. I'm asking you these questions, and it's like, yeah, it can seem like not that much preparation looking back on it, but you did what you could at the time, and that ended up to be, spoiler alert, a huge jumping off point, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I get why women say they don't want to listen to birth stories. So, yeah.
Okay, so going into birth, how did labor start for you? What were you doing? What time of year was it?
Okay, so it was November. It was Thanksgiving, 2021, and everything I learned from podcasts. Me and my husband, I was about 2 weeks from my due date, and Samuel was so low in my pelvis. I was thinking I was going to give birth any day, and so because it just like hurt to pee because he was so like close to the bladder. And so it was the day after Thanksgiving, and my husband and I were like, let's try to induce labor naturally. So we took a ride in the truck. He's got an old 80s Chevy, and we were just like bouncing through the fields in the truck, and then ate Thanksgiving leftovers. It was like Thanksgiving 2.0. And so I was super full. And then we got home and we were watching TV. It was like 9:30 at night, and we were cuddling and stuff, and I just started going into labor, and I had a contraction, And then I had another contraction, and the contractions were like 4 to 5 minutes apart. Sometimes they were 2 minutes apart, lasting for a minute. That's how I started out my labor with Samuel. It was super intense. And we live an hour from the hospital because we live very far in the country. And so I was like, I need to drink some water. I need to take a shower. I need to lay down. So I did all 3 of those things, and my contractions still kept coming that fast. And so when I was laying down, which was the 3rd thing I did out of the 3, I called the on-call number and I said, hey, this is what's happening to me. I'm having these contractions like this. And they were like, okay. So it was an on-call nurse anyway. So they were like, we think you might have a UTI, because I told them that it hurt to pee a little bit because he was so low. And they're like, well, we think you might have a UTI, so just come on into the ER and we'll take a look at you. So,
and sorry to interrupt you, how far along were you at this point?
I was 39 weeks. So it was about a week before. So I was 39 weeks and 0 days when I went into labor. And so this was probably about 10:30 when I talked to the on-call, and we'd already packed the bags. So they were like, come on in. And I was like, hey, Robert, we need to go, which is my husband. I was like, we need to go to the ER. And we have a smaller hospital 30 minutes from us. And I was thinking we should go there. And he was like, well, why don't we go to the hospital where you're going to give birth and bring your bags just in case. I was like, oh, yeah, good idea. So he got the bags in the car. And at 11 o'clock on the dot, we left. And, mind you, the first contraction was like 9:30 something. And then we got to the hospital at like midnight. And when I walked in there, they, admitted me in, and the triage nurse put me on the monitor, and she was like, you're 5 centimeters dilated. So they took my urine sample to see if I had a UTI, and I didn't have a UTI, and I was actually in labor. But it was a little scary, like just backing up thinking that I had a UTI. Because when I was on the way to the hospital, like mentally, I was like, is something wrong with me? Like, am I okay?
Right.
And when I was in the car, the road was super windy going to the hospital. And because it's like going closer to the mountains. And I was in so much pain. I literally had a contraction the whole way there. Just sitting down hurt. And I didn't really understand what was happening in my body at the time. And so I probably should have been like not sitting on my bottom at the time. And, but yeah, so the triage nurse checked me. She was like, we'll get you into a room. And, leading up to the COVID birth, I had a lot of questions about policies. And what ended up happening was I had to get COVID tested in my nose. And I could only have 2 people in the room. So like my husband, and then I had my mom come later. And I was also worried, like, am I going to get a nurse that's overbearing, and someone who's going to like tell my husband that he has to have on a mask every time she walks in the room, because that was another thing. And thankfully I had beautiful nurses. The room was beautiful. They had a nice mural on the wall of a stream falling down. Anyway, so it was a beautiful room. And about the time when I got to the hospital, my contractions leveled out, and there was a little bit of space in between them for about 2 hours. So come about 2 o'clock, somewhere in there, I was vomiting repeatedly. And, I had just spent the last 2 days wolfing down Thanksgiving. So it was probably all coming out, and because it was a lot. And the nurse before that kept offering me, like, would you like something for the vomiting? And I was like, no. And towards the last one, when everything, it was like the bile at that point. So I was like, I think I'll take something. And then after that, my contractions started to become without relief. And at this point, it was about 3 a.m. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, if I don't have the baby within an hour, I'm going to get an epidural. Like, I need an epidural because it was back to back to back, and I was suffering. I was wallowing on the bed, side to side. It was bad. And
was your goal to go unmedicated before you went into the birth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I was basically winging it, but so the nurse was like, well, would you like me to check you? And I was like, yeah, sure, we'll see. And I had been there for about 3 hours since the first check, and the second check I was 7 centimeters. So I was like, I want the epidural. And so I was laying in the bed, and they're like, all right, it's going to take a little while because we got to get the on-call person in. And I was like, okay, take as much time as you need, because in the past, like, just naturally, like, I always think that patience makes things go by a lot faster when you're suffering. And so I was like, they kept coming in and reminding me, like, oh, it's coming. And I'm like, it's okay. And so they brought the papers in and had them up to me so I could see them. And I was like, I couldn't see. I was like
squinting, looking at it.
I mean, everything was so dark at that point. Like, if you squint your eyes right before they shut, that's what the whole room looked like, because it was so dark to me. And so I was like, do y'all have a highlighter where I can sign? And so, they had to put an X and get my arm up there. So, I was in bad shape pain-wise, and looking back, I should have just gotten in the tub, because they had a nice tub, instead of getting the epidural. But I was too far gone. You couldn't communicate with me or nothing. So I got the epidural, and then once the epidural kicked in, I got super hungry, and I was like, have something to eat. And they're like, well, you can have bone broth. And I was like, I want a cheeseburger. And because I felt so good at that point, So
your stomach was empty at that point.
Yeah, and I was all drugged up. So I started texting, people like my dad and my aunt and uncle, and people I'm closer to, that I was in labor. And so yeah, we ended up, I was too excited to fall asleep, but I ended up getting some sleep, and they put a peanut ball in between my legs while I was on my side, and my husband and my mom were asleep. And then I woke up to the doctor pulling her fingers out, saying that the baby was 2 centimeters from the opening. And at the time I was like, oh, from the opening of the cervix or the canal or the surface. And we were all sleeping, and she was like, all right, let's turn up the shades. And she was like, Robert, go get some coffee and get you and Mom some coffee, and we're gonna start pushing this baby out in about 10 minutes. And so so pushing, it took about, I think it was 45 minutes. And I was just on my back like this with my legs up, and they would tell me when I had a contraction, because I couldn't feel anything, and I would push. Robert got a little nauseous at the beginning of pushing, because he got up and then ran to get the coffee, and then hadn't eaten, and so he had to have a seat. But so I pushed out Samuel's head, and I can't see anything because I've got a sheet over me and everything. And I'm completely numb. So Samuel's head comes out, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of commotion, and pushed me back, and they're like, push, push, push. And I was like, okay. And they're like, don't stop, don't stop. So I would take a breath and then push, and then take a breath and push, and then he just came out. And I didn't realize it until a little bit later, but I had shoulder dystocia with him. And I didn't realize it because I had never heard of it before. And they put him right on my chest, and he had great APGAR scores. I watched him turn from blue, purple to like red to pink to white. And that stood out to me a lot, because that's something that you just don't know until you have a baby. I think, for the most part, depending on the health of the child, like seeing them turn color as they're like crying, that first cry. And so, yeah.
So what was that experience like for you? Because it did stand out so much. Was it scary, or was it one of those things that just kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, so it stuck with me. I felt very thankful for the nurses. I felt like they were all angels, but I had a lot of confusion and questions about the shoulder dystocia. Mm-hmm. And so I just looked it up on social media, basically. Like, I looked up on Instagram shoulder dystocia, and there's like birth influencers that talk about it. And I was just like, this kind of seems like a big deal. Maybe I should talk to her about that. But looking back on the birth, I don't feel like I didn't think about things until later when I found out some things in my chart. Because I had some bleeding afterwards too, that they were concerned about, where I was given a shot of methergin in my thigh. The nurse told me, she was like, this is going to help with clotting the blood. And is it okay if I administer it in your thigh? And I was like, that's fine. Yeah, stuff kind of really started to become more aware of things later. Yeah. But at the time, I was just in the throes, of postpartum with my son.
Yeah.
So.
Have you gone through any sort of, I don't want to say formal because that's not the right word, but any sort of organized processing of the birth? Or has it been more sort of organic, like you were saying, looking through your chart and having discussions and doing your own research, things like that?
Yeah. Firstly, I haven't had anything formal. But firstly, I have done a lot of research myself, and my midwife for my second birth talked with me a lot about my births for my first. I was actually in denial of the shoulder dystocia. I was like, I don't think I actually had it. Like, I have a feel, like, I just thought that the doctor just kind of like yanked him out. And because it happened so fast. And but she was like, no, you did have a shoulder dystocia. But postpartum was tough. Yeah. After that birth.
I just have a couple more questions about that. So when you say they pushed you back, did they do the maneuver where they push your legs all the way back to your ears? Is that what that was? Okay, I think that's called McRoberts.
Yep, they laid the bed back, and then there was a nurse on each side, holding my legs, and they're like, push, push, push. And then she did the McRoberts movement and pulled him out. It was a total of 30 seconds. And I didn't really talk to her about it. She just basically, at the time, the doctor just took care of me and stitched me up a little bit and just made sure the bleeding was done and just left. So,
yeah. So for everyone listening who has maybe had a similar experience, or maybe you're about to go into a birth, I'll actually put a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode as well. But Samantha has had some time to process the birth, and thankfully you're the midwife for your second birth. was able to hold space for you. So for everybody like just listening, let's all just take a deep breath because we probably all need that right now.
Okay.
It's a lot, and there's a lot of layers and a lot of questions that I could ask you about that because there are many points of that story where different people would sort of pull out different parts of your story as this was a violation or this was not okay. And you have your own memory of that. You have your own version of that you have already gone through and processed. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be very clear for anyone listening that this is not a birth story processing session. You have your own resources for that. But your story is your own. And I'm really interested to hear how you took that experience and moved forward with it. And I also wanted to tell you that this is probably obvious, but I always want to acknowledge the fact that we do the best we can with the information that we have at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think the world would be a better place if we were all a little bit more compassionate with ourselves about that. And I'm not saying that you're not. This is just a generalized point that I think if we give ourselves a little bit more grace for the points in our life where we come up against these things, the world would be a better place. So, all right. So you said you had a hard time postpartum, and I can completely see why that might be, but what was your experience?
So I do want to preface this by saying my postpartum experience was very eye-opening to me because there's a lot about birth that I don't think people know. And if they don't know it, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, their doctors aren't going to say anything about it. Just based on my experience, I was having obviously a hard time breastfeeding, due to him being kind of lethargic from the epidural. And my milk wouldn't come in after the birth. So, there was milk coming out, but it wasn't the full-on milk. When your milk comes in on like day 2 to 5, you can definitely tell a difference. That never happened. My son was he wasn't at the point of gaining weight yet from his birth. And so what ended up happening was I had retained placenta and didn't know it. And I got that removed on mid-February, like February 11th.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was still bleeding on week 5. And, I had no idea, you're supposed to stop bleeding a week or 2 after birth. So I just made a call to the obstetrician's office and I said, hey, I'm still bleeding. I have an appointment next week, but I just wanted to know if that's normal. And they're like, no, it's not normal. We want you to come into the office. And so I packed me and my child up, who I was trying to breastfeed, and drove up there. They did an ultrasound and weren't sure what they were looking at. And so the next week, because I stopped bleeding for 1 or 2 days, and then it came back. And then I had the 6-week checkup, and sorry, I'm starting to wonder if this might be a little bit too hard to hear. So my doctor recommended at my 6-week checkup, before they knew I had placenta left, that she wanted me to have a C-section for the next pregnancies because of the shoulder dystocia. And I was like, that's a lot to talk about right now. And so I didn't even think to talk about the shoulder dystocia. And so I just made a subsequent appointment, I think around 7 weeks or 5 days later, to ask about the shoulder dystocia, which she explained to me was an obstetrical emergency, that the child can actually be hurt during the process, or the mother, and that it prevents oxygen to the baby. So that was really hard to hear because I had never heard of a shoulder dystocia before this, right? This is a lot of the reason that I'm so passionate in sharing my story, because I want women to know that they should have information about birth before. Now, during that time, I had about 3 ultrasounds. So it was around New Year's Eve where I went for another ultrasound, and they said that they didn't see anything at the ER. Yet I was still bleeding, and the nurse told me that she could give me a suppository and a shot in the arm or leg to try to release it. And I asked her, I said, is this going to hurt my milk supply? Because I wanted my baby to have milk from my breast too, and I was supplementing at the same time. And she said, yeah, it's going to hurt it. And I said, I don't want to take the medication. So with Samuel, during that time, I was using breast shields to help him get, or nipple shields to help him get a deeper latch. Every time my husband would feed him a bottle, I would pump, so that way the supply and demand would keep up. And so I was constantly working on trying to keep the breastfeeding situation going, and it was very stressful. And I do want to celebrate, I've breastfed him for 15 months. And after February, when I had the placenta removed, I actually continued to breastfeed him. I saw a increase in my milk supply. But also, I do want to say it's so important that first breastfeeding means everything. Like, you want to get the breastfeeding the first time. And so I don't think it ever became what it should have been. But he still got, some of the good stuff. And yeah. So
Absolutely.
I never stopped learning after that. I wanted to know everything about birth, and I was fascinated and interested with it, and just had a lot of hurt afterwards in between the 2 children once I learned what was going on, because they never actually told me directly that it was placenta. I learned it from my midwife whenever I got pregnant again. So I'm not here to talk bad about hospitals and doctors, but it's just like what happens sometimes. And you have to be careful to take care of yourself and have people who will take care of you outside of just institutional care. My hometown in between, there's a town in between here in the hospital where I went to the dentist. And within the same year, she was telling me the story where she had her 7th child with this same practice, and they left a placenta in her with a C-section. And she was like, oh, it's okay, people make mistakes. And I was like, after what I had been through and was just processed through, I was like, that's not a mistake. They left a steak in you, a 6-ounce steak. But, so yeah, I've processed, through this a lot. And I think it probably has a lot to do with why I care so much about birth, but not so much that, just helping women to know how to take care of themselves and just basic things. Yes. So.
Yes. And so one thing that you said, I just want to reiterate as well that your care is the care that you received is one model of care. Mm-hmm. And the story that they told you is one story about what happened with the shoulder dystocia. Because if you take any topic, but usually using shoulder dystocia as an example, this is a widely contested, debated topic about what constitutes a shoulder dystocia. Yeah. And so in the medical model, I don't need to, this is not a whole educational episode about shoulder dystocia, but if you search, there's a lot out there about, is it in the medical model, they do a one-step delivery where the head comes out and then they expect the rest of the body to come out immediately and they pull that out. Okay. If they don't wait for the shoulder to turn in a two-step process, then a lot of OBs and midwives in the hospital system would consider that a dystocia. Other people have a time attached to it. Other people, and then there's the whole thing about what position are you in? There are different approaches to how to resolve that. Is it real and is it a thing? Absolutely. Can it be a medical emergency? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it's that fine line of when practitioners infuse their fear into their patients. Is that appropriate? And at what point does that happen? It's a whole big conversation. So I just wanted to acknowledge the nuance within that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention with the bleeding that you experience, I'm so glad that you paid attention to your body and you made those phone calls and you went in. And it sounded absolutely appropriate that when you didn't bleed for a few days and then it started up again, that is something to be checked out. I just wanted to say that if you are somebody who is freshly postpartum and you do have bleeding in week 3 or 4 or 5, and again, this is not medical advice at all, but it can be normal to have spotting at those times. But if you have new bleeding or increasing bleeding, absolutely, that's something to get checked out. So just a couple things that I wanted to throw out there. And I am so excited and happy for you and your baby and your family that you're able to keep breastfeeding, because that's a huge accomplishment and something to latch on to, for lack of a better term, after you've gone through all of that. It's a really big accomplishment. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to, use your discretion, though, when you are breastfeeding like that, because I think it was very stressful for him and I.
Yeah.
And looking back, I think it wouldn't have been a bad idea to just formula feed. Given the circumstances, given, the medical circumstance, like, it would have been appropriate. I mean, not that it, I think that choosing to formula feed would have probably been better for us during that time.
Sure.
But we made it through it. We made it through those hard few months, and then it was worth it. So
yeah, that's a good point too. And yes, you can do it, but at what cost?
Right.
Yeah. So. Okay. So at what point did you start sort of feeling like yourself again, or did that point come?
So, I've had time to reflect over this. Looking back, I think I was pretty depressed. Didn't know it, because you still function, for the most part. And when Samuel hit about 9 or 10 months, I really started to just fall in love with him. I really started to bond with him a lot. And during that time, I was like, I would love to have another you. And I got baby fever. And I was like, I want another child. And, the more the merrier. So we got pregnant a year postpartum. And I was still breastfeeding. And the only thing I was really worried about when I got pregnant was Samuel's not sleeping through the night yet. Which he ended up sleeping through the night. A little bit more about his postpartum care. So he got torticollis, and I was laying him down in a bassinet to sleep. And then if I wasn't wearing him, I put him in a bouncer, when I was sitting down and just bouncing with my feet. So he got a flat spot, and they were going to put a helmet on him per the pediatrician's recommendations. And I was thinking, man, I don't know if it's that bad, because once you put it on, you can't take it off. So in me and my husband's opinion, and, our the grandparents, that were like, it's kind of not really needed, from a health standpoint. So maybe we shouldn't do that, because it, looking back, it might be a little embarrassing for him. And So we just decided to just let it be, and I started doing research on chiropractic care. And so when I was pregnant, I started going to a chiropractor immediately for me and for my son. Found a wonderful chiropractor in East Virginia. And we've been going to her for several years now. And he started sleeping through the night. And that's just like one of the biggest things that stood out. So yeah, I was getting into my second pregnancy the first few months, and I was having round ligament pain. I had some sciatic pain and some pelvic pain. And I was like sort of miserable. And whenever I was going to the chiropractor, like she would adjust me and I would feel completely fine. And then it would start to come back. This is during the first trimester towards the end. And then she would adjust me and I would feel completely normal again. So that was very helpful. And I was doing a ton of research and I was looking for, anyways, do you want to ask me a question? I feel like I'm starting to ramble.
No, it's so good. It's so good. I just wanted to say, if that's not an like a good ad for chiropractic care, like Webster chiropractic care, but then also the pediatric specific chiropractic care, I don't know what is. Increased comfort and then having your baby sleep through the night. Doesn't happen all the time, but it's a really, really nice possibility. So, and I actually interviewed Dr. Sadie Broker on the podcast. That's a good episode to listen to if you guys are interested in the chiropractic side of pregnancy and birth. So anyway, that was just a little plug for another episode. So did you have in your first trimester with your second son, and what is his name?
Samuel. Oh, second son, Luke.
Luke. Samuel and Luke. I love it. Okay. So were you nauseated again like you were with Samuel in your first trimester?
No, I had a great pregnancy. So I credited it to eating a lot of protein because I remember with Samuel, week 7 is when I started getting nauseous because the HCG was kicking in. So with Luke, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, around week 4 officially, and I found a midwife, she recommended me to eat, I think it was like something like 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. I don't know if this would work for everybody, but I immediately started eating because I was like, oh gosh, I'm not sleeping at night. Like I need to make sure I don't get nauseous. So I just started eating protein like that and trying to do, 30 grams per meal. So no, I did not have nausea. It was a great pregnancy. I was giddy the whole time, and yeah, pregnancy was great.
Awesome.
So,
and at what point did you decide to go the midwifery route? And was that at a hospital, at a birth center, or at home? What did that thought process and conversation look like with your husband, all those things?
Okay, so actually with Samuel, I considered a home birth. Because of the COVID policies, and I was worried about certain things, not so much getting sick. That was like the least of my worries, but, I had, kind of thrown the idea out there to my husband. I was like, what if we just give birth at home? And he was like, I don't know about that. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Yeah, neither do I. So the second time around after I gave birth, I remember actually thinking, like, even though I had a tough birth in a lot of ways, like, I remember thinking, like, I want to give birth again, like, after I had my first, despite it all, before we left the hospital. And so I just knew, and so did Robert. We just knew we were going to have a home birth. And so as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I started calling around. And we live really far in the country, far from hospitals. And so it's a little harder to find midwives where we live. Like, I think there were about 8 options. And it was during August, which is a big time for midwives to take vacation. And so I think 2 or 3 were out of the thing. And then one of them's sister was giving birth. And then one of them was too far from me. And I only had one choice. And it was good because she was the best choice of midwives. So Yeah, she came to my house for the first appointment, and she's got like more kids than me, so I would drive up to see her for my prenatals, which was nice because I could like talk to her. And I needed that. Yeah. So I came about having a home birth. Leading up to it, I was just trying to just take care of myself. And then towards the end of my pregnancy, when you start putting on more weight, was when I started to look into preparing for labor. And the way that it worked out for me was looking back on my labor with Samuel, I was, shrieking and tensing up during contractions. And so my goal with Luke was to make sure that I would relax more during labor. Because I'll just explain it this way. Like when you work out a muscle, like, you know how it gets really tired and fatigued and like swollen because it's like getting worked out. So my goal was to try to relax really well so that I didn't tire myself out and feel the pain more intensely. So the way that I prepared to do that was having good supported posture all the time, where I'm relaxed, but I'm also not just like, hunching over. When I would wash dishes, I would stand in front of the sink and I would focus really heavily on how my feet were planted into the ground. So I would make sure that my arches weren't falling in and that my knees weren't falling in towards the center, but that I was not clenching my glutes, and that my toes were nice and spread out wide. And it was also summertime and spring, so we were outside in the sun a lot. I was in the garden and playing with Samuel. I put up all these different things to get prepared for the labor, and comfort measures like clary sage and mixed with olive oil. I had some acupressure balls to rub in case muscles got fatigued. I bought a birth sling that you can hook onto a door, because I remember when I was in labor with Samuel, I just wanted to be like this, but in a squatting position whilst having my upper body supported. And so that's why I bought the birth sling. And, I had some music, and those are probably the main things. I had some Gatorade prepared and some snacks, some natural Gatorade. And now, when I actually was in labor, I didn't actually use any of it. Which I'm glad I didn't, because then I didn't have... Well, I did use lavender and an oil diffuser at one point, but that's it.
Sure. How did your appointments with the midwife differ from your appointments with the OB at the hospital for Samuel?
I felt very secure. If anything, I went into my appointments with my midwife and I was like, I was talking her ear off. I was too much. And then with the doctors, I was like, what? I was like, what am I doing? I get how far along I am, and I get that I'm not in danger, but what should I do right now? It's 20 weeks. What's important this week, So I had a lot higher expectations with the doctor's appointments, and I was always left with a bunch of empty space, what is going on kind of. And then whenever I was with the midwife, I was always like, wow, okay, this is going to be great. I was like, she's got my back. I trust her. She knows me. She's not going to impose on me. She's going to take good care of me, but she's not going to just have her way with me, because she actually knows what I need. And, she's not going to be forceful or crazy acting, And towards the end, when I was processing the shoulder dystocia with her, we talked about it, And probably like halfway through, I would make some comments where like, oh, I don't know if I actually had one. I think she just, went into it, and she didn't say anything at the time. But later on down the road, she had to like put her hand on my thigh and be like, you did have a shoulder dystocia. You did. And, leading up to our birth, we rehearsed what we would do if I had a shoulder dystocia. So when I hired her, I was like, can I have a water birth with a history of shoulder dystocia? Is that okay with you? And she was like, yeah, that's okay with me. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. That's great. Now, probably 37, 35 weeks, we literally rehearsed verbally, physically, and would review it to make sure I had it memorized, what we would do if I had a shoulder dystocia.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I was like, if I have a shoulder dystocia, it'll be okay. I mean, not really, but I wasn't thinking like, oh, we can't have a shoulder dystocia. You know what I mean? Because you can't really control that too much.
Yeah.
And so, so basically what we did was if you have signs of a shoulder dystocia, I'm going to have you turn around on all fours. She was like, and if that doesn't work, we're going to have you stand up doing scissor motion like that. And if that doesn't work, we'll carry you to the bed. So I was like, okay, it's cool. And we just rehearsed it, and I would do the motions. I'd be in the office like, and so yeah, that was how our appointments went. She was medical minded, but she was never like, I want you to do this, or weird about it. She was just like, this is why you do it. Here's the statistics. She had a very Dr. Stu-ish approach to informed consent, when it comes to, I did everything she wanted me to do because I was happy to do it. And, I didn't see why not. Didn't have a problem with it. Did the glucose test with juice, and then went to LabCorp. No, that was with Samuel. I drank juice with my midwife, and then she tested my blood in her office and sent it to LabCorp from her office. I can't remember if we did the GB strep test or not, but I didn't have any antibiotics with it. But yeah, so that was how the midwife appointments went.
Yay. That's what we like to hear. It sounds like she was very happy to hold space for your autonomy. Yeah. That's what we want. a trusting practitioner. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I just, spoiler alert, I have not heard this. I guess spoiler alert is the wrong term, but I have not heard this story. So I'm learning this story along with everybody else for the first time. So how did your labor start with your second?
Okay, so I had so much prodromal labor leading up. And my midwife and I were wondering if I would have a quick labor because it was 12 hours with Samuel. And usually it's in half sometimes with second births. So we were ready for a quick birth. So she was like, as soon as you get into active labor, call me. I had some prodromal labor leading up to it and some Braxton Hicks. And it started officially, it was probably 9 o'clock. It was 9 o'clock. Yeah. In the evening, my husband and I were cuddling, and I started having back labor. And I was like, oh no, because I've heard a lot about back labor. And so I ended up doing kind of like a mile circuit, but just the inversion, where you're kind of squatted, and then your shoulders are lower than your hips. Mm-hmm. And I just put a pillow under my stomach to help me relax, because I was like, I don't want to tense up. And so I just laid down, and I just laid there, fell asleep, and woke up probably an hour later. It was 10 or 11, and I did not have anything going on with my back. So I was like, well, maybe I'm not in labor. And so I went to sleep. And during that time, my husband was like setting up all the things that I was going to want or need during labor in our bedroom. And I fell asleep and woke up. I slept all night. And I woke up at 7 a.m. It was 7:35. And I woke up and I opened my eyes and I was like, am I going to have a baby today? And so I was like just laying there for a minute. And then I had a contraction. But it was very mild. Like, I was like, I'm not sure yet, because this could just be prodromal. And so I was like, okay, but I was still happy. And I was like, well, let's get up and just get ready. So I put on a black dress, like a t-shirt dress, and just got decent. And I was like coming into the kitchen, and my husband was making eggs. No, actually, I made breakfast. So not that morning. So I was like, I'm going to go for a walk. And I had my coffee, and I was walking down my driveway, and the sun was, coming up, and it was like bright morning sun. And I was praying. I was like, dear Lord, please keep me in good disposition today. If I'm in labor, keep my spirits high. And that was really all I wanted, was to just, be just like happy in the Lord and joyful. So I came back to the house and I made eggs and peanut butter toast for breakfast, and we ate on the deck. And I was actually having contractions like every 5 to 15 minutes, but they were really mild. Like, I was still doing all this stuff, and I was like keeping my house really clean leading up to that. And I was like, all right, let me just keep on keeping it clean. So I just keep, doing stuff around the house, and I would have a contraction. I was like, is this a contraction? Because I would time them. And I'm like, it is, because it was mild. And so about lunchtime, my son was taking a nap, and my husband got some Italian food from the Italian restaurant in our town. And I got Alfredo with bacon with broccoli, and I just had a few bites, nothing to fill me up, but I was hungry, so I just ate a little bit. And then I texted my midwife, and I was like, hey, I was like, I've been in labor this morning, but it's really mild, but it's consistent. And she was like, okay, well, you can do the mile circuit. So I did the mile circuit and went through the whole thing. And my son woke up, and they were outside playing in the yard after that. And I started laying down on the bed on my side, and I was listening to worship music. There was 3 songs that I had on repeat. And through every contraction, I would just lay there and I would just feel it. I would just completely, I kind of did the Bradley method from what I've heard from other women, except I didn't do it formally. I just completely relaxed my entire person. And, like they said, eyelashes to toenails. And so I just completely relaxed and breathed, because, you got to breathe. So I would imagine during a contraction that a flower was blooming, in a time lapse, and that when it came all the way open, it was at the peak of the contraction. And then when the contraction came all the way down, I would imagine the flower closing, and I would relax. I'm like, okay, now I can relax. Because I actually had time in between the contractions. And so at this point, they were about 5 to 7 minutes apart for at least 2 hours. And it was about 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And I told my husband, I said, can you take Samuel over to your parents? And I was like, I think I might be getting into labor. And so at this point, I was in the house by myself. This is really fun. And I was like, man, I'm starting to feel labory. And I started closing the bedroom door, so the light wasn't coming into the hallway. And I started darkening the house. I took a body shower and put on something more comfortable. And I ended up turning on my lavender oil diffuser. And when Robert came back, he walked in the house, and I was like, I starting to get all shy and like wanting to be private at that point. So it took me a second to like warm up to him because I started getting shy. You know, when you start getting like all like private and you're in labor. And so I was like, I think I might be getting into active labor. And so I texted my midwife and I was like, I think I'm in active labor. And so she came over. First, her assistant came over who was closer. And she, you know, while I was waiting, and I was laying back on the bed. And at this point, I was starting to get like more having to breathe and be quiet during contractions. And I was laying on the bed and Robert was like, should I fill up the tub? And I was like, yeah. And so he was filling up the tub and I looked at him and I started crying. And I was like, we're about to have a baby. I was all excited and he was all excited. And then, no. I'm sorry. I started crying because I was sad. I was like, I didn't feel happy about giving birth to Samuel like I feel happy about giving birth to Luke right now. Mm-hmm. And so then it just switched real quick, you know, because I was starting to have mood swings. And so the birth tub was filling up, and then midwife assistants came in to the house, and I was laying on the bed again, and she was like, how are you? And I was like, I feel like a patient now that you're here. And she was like, oh, okay, do you want me to leave you alone? And I'm like, yeah. And so she went back into the living room. I felt bad. Well, anyways, so she was very respectful of me. And when my midwife got there, she came in. She's like, how you doing, Mama? And I was like, I think I'm about to have a baby. And because I was pretty much in transition. And I started needing to go to the toilet and nothing was coming out. And so I would lay back on the bed and my midwife came in and she was like, do you want me to check you? And I thought about it. I was like, nah. Because I was like, if I get checked, then I might start thinking about it. And I just want to keep on doing what I'm doing. And she was like, okay. She was like, if you want to get in the birth tub anytime. Well, I don't think she actually said that, but I think I asked her about getting in the tub or something. She's like, yeah, go ahead, get in the tub or something. And so I ended up getting in the tub. And that felt good. That thing was warm. And like the buoyancy of the water like defied the gravity that was adding on to tension with like contractions and things like that. And I was like kind of hanging over it like a frog. And then Robert was right there. And at this point, when I started having contractions, I was like doing like the sound when you start getting the tension. Mm-hmm. And I was like, not sure where I was at, you know. And every time I had a contraction, I was like, just breathe. Just relax. Because it was getting real painful at that point. But I would have a break. So I was like, I would have a contraction. And I stopped timing them at this point. But like I think I had like 5 or 7 minutes in between transition contractions. So I was like, thank you. So I'm in the birth tub, and every time I would make that guttural noise, I could hear my midwife and her 2 assistants like tiptoeing down the hallway.
That's what I would do if I were your doula.
And I was like, I gotta be quiet.
No.
I'm just kidding. No. And, so, you know, they were hidden, the assistants were hidden, and then my midwife would check the Doppler, check with the heartbeat. And so yeah, some fun facts was like Robert and I were listening to this one song, and we're like dancing to this one song and like made some jokes. And in between contractions. And then when the contraction would come, I'd be like, all right, be quiet, don't talk to me. I mean, I was more relaxed at the time. But, so yeah, I got closer to pushing time, and previously I had felt myself to see if I could feel his head, but I didn't feel anything, and it hurt really bad, and it caused me to have a contraction. So I stopped, but then I checked again, and I felt a head pretty close. And Robert, I was hungry. I started getting hungry, and I was like, I'm hungry. And he was like feeding me these pretzel things with peanut butter in them that I had for postpartum. And he put one in my mouth, and I started chewing it up. I was like, it's dry. So I was like, can I have some blueberries? And so he started to walk off to get the blueberries, and then I had a contraction, and I started pushing, and they're like, Robert, come back. So I never got blueberries. Sorry, I'm just excited looking back on it. And so I was pushing, and before he started crowning, because I wanted to push at that point, I was like, it was like scratching an itch. And because I got tired of doing that, like uncontrollable, like, so I just started pushing because I was like, I don't want to do that. And so before he started crowning, it felt like just pressure. It didn't hurt. It was just like real tight and pressure. And I was like, ooh. And then whenever he started crowning, it started to burn a little bit at first on the surface until, I got like, then it just adjusted to like more of like a painful feeling instead of a burning, like intense sensation. So I'm laid back again, in like the traditional position anyways. And, I'm pushing, and, my midwife has got the flashlight looking in there, and people are charting, or one of them's charting, the other one's there with hands, and trying to think how this started out. I don't want to miss any details. So anyways, I'm pushing, and I kind of started to sense that he was stuck, because I was like, I'm pushing really hard. I don't feel anything changing down there. So I was like, kind of like looking at my midwife, and because you feel so much, it's hard to put your finger on things in the moment. And my midwife was like, okay, Samantha, she was like, I want you to turn around. So I knew exactly what was happening. She didn't have to be like, this is a shoulder dystocia, Yeah. And so I was like, okay. So I turned around, and she was trying to like maneuver his shoulder out.
And are you still in the tub at this point, or had you gotten out?
Yes. So I'm still in the tub. So I turn around, and she's trying to maneuver her shoulder out. And I think like 10 or 15 seconds or something short went by, and she was like, okay, I'm going to have you stand up and scissor. So I stood up, and my husband lifted up my front leg to get on top of the birth tub while one leg was in the water, because you want to do like this instead of like that with a shoulder dystocia, because your pelvis opens up more at the bottom when you're like this, and it opens up more at the top and closes at the bottom when you straddle.
Yes.
So I
what
had
you're describing for our listeners, because we won't have necessarily video on this, is the leg that comes up is going to be at a 90-degree angle instead of just having both legs straight but separated.
Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I started to get a little nervous. I was like, kept pushing. And in my mind, I had this thought to rebuke death. And I just started saying, I don't know if I said this out loud, but in my mind, I kept like rebuking death in Jesus' name. Rebuking death in Jesus' name. And I just kept pushing. I was like, I'm pretty sure I didn't say it because I was screaming, but it was all good. And then she was like, okay, let's go to the bed. And as soon as my husband lifted me up out of the pool, he fell out. like when I was going over to the bed. And so he was born on the edge of the bed. And Robert caught him, and I jumped on the bed, and I was like, "Give me my baby!" And so he was born. And, he was a little purple, blue, like babies that go through that. And, like, I knew he was alive, though. Like, it wasn't a thing, like, where I'm like, "Oh, my gosh, are you okay?" Like, I knew he was fine. And, I rubbed him, and I just, like, tried nurturing him and, like, just keeping him close to my bosom for when he was ready. And I just kept watching him. I'm like, when is he going to try to breastfeed? That was my next thought. And then once I was, doing that, the ladies were checking on me. I had some bleeding. And I got 3 tinctures in a glass like this of herbs. And that helped my bleeding. I don't know what they were. I can't remember what it was. But it was just like liquid like that. And then they gave me some thing underneath my tongue, too. That was also a tincture or herb. And after Luke breastfed and things calmed down a little bit, I was like, "Oh, well, I can't have any more kids." Because I had another shoulder dystocia. And so in my mind, I was just like, "Oh, that's it." And, I had a lot of reflecting on that, too, that I'd like to talk about. But whenever I gave birth, one of the assistants who has, I think, 8 or 10 kids, she's in her training, and she just took my foot and squeezed it and squeezed my leg, and she was like, "You are such an amazing woman." And I was like, "Thank you," because it was so sweet. Like, she was just like an angel. And my midwife was just so calm and pleasant and on her game, and I felt so taken care of. Like, no harm was done, and was so taken care of. And they cleaned me up, took me to the toilet, and cleaned up the toilet, and made me eggs, and asked me if I used butter or Pam, and I was like, "I use butter." And it was just really just the best experience. And my midwife came back to visit me with one of her assistants 3 days later, and came back again a week later, and then came back. Like, I was so much more cared for, in my opinion, with my midwife than, being in the hospital. Yeah, I didn't have to leave the hospital. I didn't have people worrying me about things that didn't need to be worried about. I didn't have people holding me hostage in the hospital because, they were wanting to keep me in the hospital extra because of Billy Rubin with Samuel. I was like, "Can we just please go home?" Yeah. It was the best birth ever. So he was born at 7:30 p.m. So I had a 22-hour labor, but I slept through the night. And I had a nice, gentle, early labor. And then I had a quick, active labor and a pretty smooth transition. Like, I think I had the best birth I could have asked for. I wish that other women could have my only regret is that I didn't have, like, a birth photographer or someone to, like, document that. So it was very amazing. So.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I just never get tired of hearing women's transformation and their experiences and the resilience that, through everything, whether our births are labeled as traumatic or the best experience, it's you are powerful in both. I do have to ask you, how big were your babies?
Okay. So they were close. Samuel was the same size as I was, 7 pounds, 6 ounces.
Okay.
And Luke was 7 pounds and 14 ounces. And Luke started gaining weight on day 3.
Nice.
My milk came in so fast, and it was just so easy, to breastfeed, at times. And I think it had a lot to do with the birth that I had. And yeah, I really feel like with the home birth that I had, versus my hospital birth, that everything was more centered around mine and my child's well-being in a way that supported the transition from the baby coming into the world and becoming acclimated to the world and learning how to survive outside of the womb. I think that was the best thing I could have done with my experience for that transition for my child, because I was good, he was good. Yeah, I mean, there's few things, like, I think I'm going to quote Dr. Stu here about, or maybe someone on his podcast, that said, you can't recreate birth. It's just natural. And I feel that way about, things like fire. You can't recreate fire. You can't recreate earth, like nature. And if you do, you kind of mess it up. And you shouldn't have to do that, because there is a creator for birth. Someone who created birth, someone who created fire, someone who created the earth. And I think that we should be given the space to be secure in that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I don't think women should go. I don't want women to be afraid of giving birth. A certain amount of fear is good, but nothing like how I was afraid of giving birth. And I think that you see that very often in a lack of knowledge with women. And so, yeah, that's why I like to share the story of my experience. It might seem traumatic, and there are some messed up situations, but it was redeemed. So
what you said absolutely makes sense, because it's the difference between being present in the bigness of the unknown. It's the difference between that and everybody else's fear of the unknown, where they know some of the things that could happen, and so they project that onto you. That's how I perceive the difference. But what an incredible story you have, and I thank you for being so vulnerable and open and generous with your time and the sharing of your story.
Thank you.
So I have one last question for you. First of all, where can people find you if you want them to find you?
Well, I don't want you to find me. I'm just kidding.
That's fair too.
But, I do have personal, social medias with my name, but I'm not actually influencing or trying to promote anything. So I don't think people would be interested.
Well, I do think that your story is incredibly impactful. So what you've shared here today is great. And I have one last question for you. Okay. If you could offer one piece of wisdom to transform the fear and trauma in today's birth culture into confidence, healing, and triumph, what would it be?
I would say that there's more than one way to do things. Not in the way of you should be flexible, but there's more out there than what is just put in front of you. And I think that if you dig deep enough within yourself, then you can learn where to dig deep to find the other ways. And for me, that was having a home birth after not knowing what a placenta was when I was pregnant with my first child. So, and it was the right decision. So I would just say there's more than one way to do things, and you should explore it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.